All right. So, you've probably been seeing these headlines about China and Japan selling off U.S. Treasury bonds.
Yeah.
And you're probably like, wait a minute, what's going on here?
Right.
Well, we've got a whole stack of news articles and expert analysis here
Oh, yeah.
that we're going to deep dive into.
It's a fascinating situation for sure.
Yeah.
It's not just like investment strategies.
Yeah.
It's like a puzzle.
Yeah.
With pieces of geopolitics and global finance.
Uh-huh.
And maybe even a glimpse into the future of the U.S. dollar.
Oh, yeah. I admit I'm a little nervous about this whole thing.
Yeah.
I mean, U.S. Treasury bonds always seemed like the ultimate safe investment, like lending money to that friend who always pays you back.
Right.
Except it's the U.S. government.
Yeah. Basically, they're loans to the U.S. government.
Right.
And they're seen as super reliable.
Right.
Historically, countries have loaded up on them.
Okay.
For a couple of key reasons.
Okay.
One, it helps stabilize their own currencies.
Uh-huh.
So think of it as like ballast in a ship.
Okay. Got it.
And second, they're seen as a solid store of value.
Right.
A way to park money that, will hold its worth.
And China and Japan have been the biggest holders of these bonds for years, right?
Yeah, exactly.
For a long time.
They've been the top foreign holders for quite a while.
Yeah.
But now they're both selling them off.
And that's got people talking.
Yeah. And that's what's got everybody, kind of scratching their heads.
Yeah. So why the sudden shift?
Yeah.
It seems counterintuitive to back away from something that's considered so safe.
Well, there's a few threads to untangle here.
Okay.
One is diversification.
Okay.
It's like the old saying, don't put all your eggs in one basket, right?
Right.
Countries are realizing that they might be a little too reliant on the U.S. dollar.
Uh-huh.
And they're looking to spread the risk a little bit.
So are they switching to other currencies or maybe gold?
Yeah.
I remember my grandparents talking about gold like it was magic.
You're on the right track. We are seeing some shifts towards things like gold, which tends to hold up well in uncertain times.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also about finding other currencies to rely on.
Okay.
The world is changing, and some are looking beyond the U.S. dollar.
So it's not just a practical financial move, but maybe a political statement too?
Yeah, that's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
This sell-off could be interpreted as a way to reduce reliance on the U.S. financial system.
Okay.
Especially with, all the geopolitical tensions we've been seeing.
Right. It's like saying, hey, we're not entirely happy with how things are going over there.
Exactly.
Okay.
China, in particular, has been more assertive on the global stage.
Right.
Think about all the trade disputes
Yeah.
and all the disagreements over various international issues.
Mm-hmm.
This could be their way of exerting a little leverage.
Okay, so what about Japan?
Yeah.
Are they doing something similar?
Well, Japan's been more focused on managing its own currency, the yen.
Right.
They've actually intervened directly in the currency markets
Yeah.
to keep the yen from weakening too much against the U.S. dollar.
But how does that tie into selling U.S. Treasury bonds?
So to prop up the yen, they've been selling off their U.S. dollar reserves.
Yeah, okay.
And guess what makes up a big chunk of those reserves?
U.S. Treasury bonds.
You got it.
Okay.
U.S. Treasury bonds.
So we've got diversification,
Yeah.
possible political maneuvering,
Uh-huh.
and Japan trying to manage its own currency.
Right.
Sounds like there's a lot more to this than just simple economics.
Absolutely. And what's fascinating is that this all ties back to that bigger question we touched on earlier.
Yeah.
What does the future hold for the U.S. dollar's dominance?
That's what I'm really curious about.
Yeah.
So what happens to the U.S. economy if this keeps up? I mean,
Ah.
could this lead to something bad?
That's the million-dollar question.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something we'll dig into further in the next part of our deep dive.
All right, I'm on the edge of my seat already. It's getting good.
Yeah.
Okay, so last time we were talking about China and Japan selling off U.S. Treasury bonds. And you mentioned some potential consequences for the U.S. economy if this keeps up.
Yeah, it's definitely a valid concern.
Yeah, okay.
If we see large-scale sell-offs continue, it could create instability in the bond market.
Okay, I'm going to need you to break that down a bit for me.
Sure.
What exactly does instability in the bond market mean for regular people?
Yeah.
Like, is my retirement fund going to disappear?
Well, it's not quite that dramatic,
Oh, yeah.
but it can definitely have a ripple effect.
Okay.
So think about it this way. When there's less confidence in the bond market,
Mm-hmm.
it becomes more expensive for the U.S. government to borrow money.
Okay.
It's kind of like if you're trying to get a loan and your credit score isn't so hot.
Right, so higher interest rates for the government.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that means they have less money to spend on things like infrastructure projects,
Mm-hmm.
education, social programs, all the things that keep the economy humming.
So it's not just some abstract financial thing.
Right.
It could directly impact our everyday lives. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there's another potential consequence we need to consider.
Right, why?
A weaker U.S. dollar.
Right.
If other countries are selling off their dollar holdings,
Mm-hmm.
that means there's less demand for the dollar,
Right.
which could lead to its value dropping.
And I'm guessing a weaker dollar means everything gets more expensive?
Yeah.
Inflation, all that?
Exactly.
Okay.
Everything from imported goods to travel costs could be affected.
Yeah.
That morning latte might start costing you a bit more.
Right, but before we spiral into a doomsday scenario,
Yeah.
we should remember that the U.S. economy is incredibly resilient.
It is. It's vast and diverse.
So you're saying we're not headed for an economic collapse just because China and Japan are selling some bonds?
Most experts don't think so.
Okay, good.
At least not right away.
Okay.
But this situation is definitely a sign that the global landscape is shifting.
Okay.
And, we need to pay attention.
So what should we be looking out for?
Yeah.
What are the warning signs that things might be getting a bit shaky?
Well, one key indicator is foreign investment flows.
Okay.
If we start to see a consistent pattern of foreign investors pulling out of U.S. assets,
Mm-hmm.
that could be a sign of waning confidence.
It's like everyone's voting with their wallets,
Yeah.
sending a message that they're not so sure about the U.S. anymore.
In a way, yeah, and it's not just about China and Japan.
Right.
We need to watch what other major holders of U.S. Treasuries are doing.
Mm-hmm.
Are they holding steady? Are they increasing their positions?
There.
Or are they joining the sell-off?
So it's a complex web, and there's a lot to keep track of.
It is, and that's why it's so important to understand the nuances
Okay.
and not just react to headlines.
Right.
There's a lot of information out there, and it's easy to get swept up in fear or speculation.
I have to admit I was feeling a bit anxious after hearing all this initially,
Sure.
but I'm also feeling, well, kind of excited. It feels like we're witnessing history in the making.
I understand that feeling.
Yeah.
It's a bit like standing on the precipice of something new, something unknown.
Right.
And that's what makes this whole situation so fascinating.
It's not just about bond yields and interest rates anymore.
Right.
We're talking about a potential power shift on the global stage.
Exactly. For decades, the U.S. dollar has been the dominant reserve currency,
Right.
the bedrock of the global financial system as we know it.
But what if that starts to change?
Yeah.
What if these sell-offs are a sign of something much bigger?
That's what I want to know.
Yeah, what are the alternatives?
Mm-hmm.
And what does it mean for the future of the U.S.?
Well, that's precisely what we'll explore in the final part of our deep dive.
Okay.
We'll delve into the bigger picture and examine what this could mean for the global balance of power.
All right, I'm ready. Bring on the big picture. All right, so we've talked about China and Japan selling off those U.S. Treasury bonds
Right.
and what that might mean for the U.S. economy. But you left us hanging with this idea of a global power shift.
Yeah. Yeah, this is where it gets really interesting.
Yeah?
We've been operating in this world where the U.S. dollar has been king of the hill
Yeah.
for decades, right?
Yeah.
It's the currency that most countries hold in reserve.
Yeah.
The one that dominates international trade.
It's like the gold standard, even though it's not actually tied to gold anymore.
Yeah, it's become the bedrock of the global financial system as we
Right.
know it.
Yeah.
But the thing about systems
Mm-hmm.
is they can change.
And you're saying these sell-offs could be a sign of that change?
Yeah, it's definitely a possibility.
Okay.
If countries are actively trying to, reduce their dependence on the dollar,
Right.
it could have some pretty big implications.
So think about the influence the U.S. has had on the world stage.
Exactly.
Things like sanctions and controlling financial flows.
Right. Having the world's reserve currency
Yeah.
gives you a certain amount of leverage.
Right.
But if the dollar starts to slip,
Yeah.
that leverage diminishes.
So if not the dollar, then
Yeah.
what are the contenders?
That's the big question, isn't it? We're already seeing some countries exploring alternatives.
Okay. Like wait.
Well, there's the euro, of course.
Right.
And China has been really pushing
Yeah.
for greater use of the yuan.
Okay.
Some are even talking about a return to gold,
I'm hearing more and more about cryptocurrencies too.
Yeah,
Could Bitcoin or something like that become a major player?
that's an interesting thought.
Yeah.
Cryptocurrencies are decentralized,
Right.
meaning they're not controlled by any single government.
Right.
And that makes them appealing to some,
Uh-huh.
especially those who, maybe distrust traditional financial institutions.
But they're also super volatile
Yeah, for sure.
and still pretty niche.
Right.
I can't imagine buying groceries with Bitcoin anytime soon.
Yeah, you're right. Widespread adoption is still a ways off.
Okay.
But, the technology is evolving rapidly.
Yeah.
So it's definitely something to keep an eye on.
So what does this all mean for the U.S.?
Yeah.
I mean, are we watching the decline of the dollar?
It's too early to say for sure. The U.S. still has the world's largest economy,
Right.
and its financial system is generally seen as stable.
But these sell-offs are a wake-up call, wouldn't you say?
I think so.
Yeah.
They highlight that the U.S. needs to maybe address its own financial challenges,
Mm-hmm.
like its growing national debt.
Right.
If it wants to maintain the dollar's leading role,
Right.
it needs to project strength
Uh-huh.
and inspire confidence
Yeah.
in its long-term economic stability.
Otherwise, it risks being overtaken.
Yeah,
It's almost like a competition, but with currencies instead of athletes.
that's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And the outcome of this competition
Yeah.
has huge implications
Mhm.
for the global balance of power.
Yeah.
It could lead to a more multipolar world
Uh-huh.
with several major currencies all vying for dominance.
It's kind of daunting to think about.
It is.
The world as we know it could be changing right before our eyes.
It's definitely a time of great transition,
Yeah.
but it's also an opportunity,
Okay.
a chance to rethink the global financial system
Mhm.
and build something new,
Yeah.
something more equitable and stable.
So what does this mean for our listeners?
Yeah.
What should they be doing?
The most important thing is to stay informed
Okay.
and be adaptable.
Right.
The world is changing, and the financial landscape is changing with it. The more you understand these trends,
Yeah.
the better equipped you'll be to navigate them.
It's about taking control of your own financial future.
Exactly.
Okay.
This deep dive has given you a framework for understanding these issues.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's up to you to apply that knowledge.
Okay.
Do your own research.
Yeah.
And make informed decisions.
And maybe even ask some tough questions about what kind of world we want to live in.
Right.
Will it be a world defined by competition and conflict, or cooperation and shared prosperity?
That's a question we all need to grapple with.
Yeah.
And the answer is, in many ways, up to us.
Well, that's a powerful thought to end on. Thanks for joining us on this fascinating exploration of global finance.
My pleasure.
It's been a real eye-opener for me, and I hope it has been for you, too.
Yeah, remember, knowledge is power.
Mm-hmm.
The more you know, the better equipped you'll be to navigate the complexities of the world around you.
So keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep.
Absolutely.
Until next time.